Now you want to take good care of your cutting boards because these can actually be really expensive and nobody wants to keep replacing their cutting boards. That's annoying. And like we want to keep stuff out of like the garbage as much as we can. So taking care of them is really important. So if you have a wooden cutting board like this, like I said before, do not run it through the dishwasher. Like it'll warp it, it'll strip off the finish, and it'll be all sorts of like ugly within like 1 or 2 or 3 washings. So to wash a wooden cutting board, even if you've used, or if you've chopped something questionable on it like eggs or meat, like what you do is you just run it under hot water very quickly. Like you don't want to run it under hot water and let it keep running because it'll actually warp your board and ruin the finish because wood doesn't really like hot water for a long period. And you just take like a soapy sponge or a soapy brush and you scrub it really hard. And you make sure you want to get all around the edges of the cutting board because, you know, meat juices and whatnot can drip off the side. And you want to get the underside too because you don't know where the juices of whatever you've cut have sort of traveled to. You want to wash the whole thing and then you want to rinse it off really quickly as you can. And then you want to store it upright like this. If you store your cutting board flat like this to dry, it will actually warp. The edges will actually come up. So it's especially important when it's wet to store it upright like this. And in fact, if you can store your cutting boards, all of your cutting boards upright like this permanently, that's ideal. But if you can't store them upright, you at least want to keep them upright while they're drying. When it comes to cleaning plastic cutting boards, these are actually very similar to wooden cutting boards. Again, you want to like run them under hot water. You want to scrub all possible angles with like a soapy sponge or brush because you don't know where those juices have traveled to. And then you want to run it really quickly under hot water again. Now, the problem with plastic cutting boards is that they tend to warp if you run them under hot water. And so, like, I have actually found a hack for that. So if you found that you washed your cutting board and it's kind of bowed a little bit or warped, like you just flip it over and then you run hot water over the other side. And what it does is it actually causes the plastic to bow and warp in the opposite direction, which straightens it out. So you just run it under hot water again until you notice it's straight, and then you store it upright so that it stays straight for your next use. You can also run it through the dishwasher, like I said earlier. If I'm chopping something really questionable, like chicken, I will sometimes use a plastic cutting board because I can run it through the dishwasher, which is essentially an autoclave. It gets so hot in the dishwasher. And if I pull it out and the board is warped, I just perform that hack again. Like I run it under the hot faucet, like on the unwarped side. And what happens is it then rewarps in the opposite direction and it straightens itself out. And then I store it upright and it's perfect for my next use. Another thing I like to do for safety reasons is to have separate cutting boards for meat and vegetables. And it's really handy because that way you always know which is your meaty cutting board, and that's always like the one that you chop like your questionable foods on, like anything that might have bacteria related to it. And then you always have a clean cutting board for your vegetables. And in fact, you'll see if you go to the grocery store, they'll even sell packs of like cutting boards, and they'll have like a green one for vegetables with like a little carrot or something in the corner, and then they'll have a red one for meat with a little like turkey leg or something in the corner. And those are really handy because if you have 2 separate cutting boards, one for meat and one for vegetable, and they're nearly identical, I guarantee you will mix them up because I've done it. So I've learned the hard way that it's really handy to have completely separate cutting boards that look totally different for cutting meat and vegetables so you never confuse them. It's also really handy to know that if you're washing a cutting board that has been used to chop vegetables, you of course need to wash it thoroughly, but it's not like a bacteria risk like it would be if you were using a cutting board that had been used to cut chicken or beef or eggs. So if you're washing a cutting board that has been used to cut meat or eggs or something else that's a high-risk bacteria food, it's really important to make sure that you wash it thoroughly. And like I said, you want to get every little surface, every corner, every ridge. If it has a handle, inside the handle, you want to flip it over, get the other side. If it's got words on it, like sometimes they'll have a logo that's raised, you want to really scrub in there because if you're chopping foods that are high risk, like meats, those little bacteria bits can hide in places. And so you want to make sure that you wash a cutting board that's been used to cut meat very, very carefully. So when do you replace a cutting board? That's a really great question. So I've seen people that like run their cutting boards so they're completely ragged. And some people have some really expensive cutting boards. Like you can buy a cutting board like this for like $3, but then some people spend like hundreds and hundreds of dollars on those beautiful cutting boards that have like patterns and inlay design, and they don't want to get rid of them. And I get it. But the reality is the more ragged a cutting board is, the more chances it has to harbor bacteria. So with this plastic one, like if it has like really deep grooves in it from like cutting continually in the same area, like those little like grooves are actually really hard to wash and they can harbor bacteria that it's really difficult to get out, even if you run it through the dishwasher. So like I recommend replacing your cutting boards when it gets to the point where if you run your hand along the front of it, it actually becomes like a little rough and painful. Like I don't know if you can see, but this one has like like some ridges on it, like where it's got like cut marks here, but this cutting board is fine. In fact, this cutting board has a lot more mileage to go. This one will probably last another year or two. But if you're getting to the point where you can go like this and you can feel like ridges of plastic that are actually digging into your fingers, then it's time to replace it. Same goes for wood. Like wood never really gets sharp. It won't hurt your fingers because wood is softer. But if you look at your wood cutting board and you see that it's got like deep grooves and deep ridges, it's time to replace it because it's not worth risking food safety just to hold on to a cutting board.